The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Rebekkah LaDyne, and she is here to talk about her recently published book, The Mind-Body Stress Reset: Somatic Practices to Reduce Overwhelm and Increase Well-Being. Rebekkah has spent 25 years in the field of embodied well-being. After working in therapeutic mindfulness for 15 years, she studied mind-body medicine at Saybrook University and conducted clinical research in somatic self-regulation. Based on her research in mind-body medicine, her comprehensive training with the Somatic Experiencing Institute, and her decades of professional experience, she authored The Mind-Body Stress Reset with a foreword by Kathy Kane and endorsed by Peter Levine. Rebekkah has supported thousands of people in increasing their mind-body wellness. She works with all forms of trauma and dysregulation and is particularly skilled with anxiety, overwhelm, and developmental trauma. In addition to her book, she has recorded several wellness CDs, appears on the radio and YouTube, and offers workshops internationally. She has a private practice where she meets with clients online from all over the globe. And Rebekkah lives with her husband, 2 daughters, and their puppy dog in the San Francisco Bay Area. Hi, Rebekkah, and welcome.
Hi, Lourdes. Great to be here.
I am very excited to have you here as well because the area that you work in, your focus, how you support is the same area that I work in. Mm-hmm. And I'm always on the lookout for more information, more tools, more ways of understanding what happens within us when we are stressed, anxious, when we have experienced trauma. And as you're well aware of, there's more and more and more research that has just been coming out. So I'd love to start, Rebekkah, with just finding out what inspired you to write this book.
Absolutely. I was inspired because of my journey as a helper, in which I worked with mindfulness meditation with large populations and then with individuals using therapeutic mindfulness. I began to see what were kind of little inklings that some of the students and individuals that I was working with weren't being served by that approach when their stress and anxiety or overwhelm was what I call extreme. And so kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, just to break it down. In the 1 to 5 range, I was seeing that Buddhist psychology and cognitive awareness or witnessing, which is very common in mindfulness, of course, was effective. But then I was seeing that if you get into the 5.5 to 10 range, it becomes less and less effective the higher the stress, anxiety, overwhelm levels are. And so as I was seeing this in the people I work with, I became curious. And then life presented me with my own unique experience of it, where I started to experience unusually high levels of stress and anxiety. And I started to feel in my body how ineffective that particular mindfulness, awareness, and those particular Buddhist psychology approaches were. Simultaneously, I had been a long-time recipient of talk therapy, and it had been beneficial. But again, when my cognitive awareness was no longer able to help me kind of think my way through my stress and anxiety, I really saw and lived, this isn't sufficient when we get to that 6+ level. And the reason the research explained to me it isn't sufficient is at that level, as you well know and talk about in the podcast all the time, which I so appreciate. I'm such a fan of your work.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, of course. At that level, we're moving into the amygdala and that reactivity, and also the brain stem, which controls all of our basic bodily functions. And we feel the stress, anxiety, and overwhelm viscerally and systemically. It's no longer simply a cognitive experience. And so what the research was showing me, and my own life experience and my work with clients was showing me, was after the levels reach a certain height, we can't just think our way out of it. That's really the point of the mind-body stress reset, is when it's too much, when we feel like it's overtaking us, we need tools that can allow us to use our body to soothe what is happening, to soothe that reaction in the amygdala and brainstem. And then, yes, let's also use our mind. I love the mind. I'm not at all going to say that we don't need it, but that's after. Then we can use our good thinking and our cognitive skills to continue the regulation. So the mind-body stress reset really approaches what to do when thinking isn't enough, what to do when talking it through isn't enough, when awareness of it isn't enough. And like I said, this really comes from my own severe experience of anxiety, panic attacks, feeling dysregulated much of the time. And although I'm still a work in progress, I want to put that out. I'm a human being. I haven't become perfect because of the mind-body stress reset, but it has given me access to regulation that I literally did not have access to for several years. So I'm a user of it, I'm a researcher of it, and I'm an advocate that helps my clients and students learn it.
You know, I'm so happy to hear what you're sharing, because that is also what I see in the clients that I support. And it's a double-edged sword, because without this awareness for the person who's suffering and even the person who's helping, you can find yourself actually in a place where perhaps the helping is doing more hurting. And then comes this sense of, why isn't this working for me?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that I've conceptualized this for myself and for my clients is just letting them know that once your amygdala is activated at a certain level, like, and I think this is what you're speaking to with those, above a 5.5, mm-hmm. your cortex goes offline, your limbic system, your ability to relate and connect, to nurture and to feel, that also goes offline. So your thinking center is unavailable, your feeling center is unavailable, mm-hmm. and you're left to do just the few variations on a theme that the amygdala does. And that understanding has been so helpful. Like for me as a therapist, I know also for clients and even working with couples, just to help them both know that when you get to a certain point in a conflict or a disagreement, mm-hmm. Even being able to pay attention to that and to know when you're getting to a point where we're going to need to do something different or pause or retreat, because now it's just not going to be helpful.
That's right. Yes, that point is coming to understand what activation, that's the word I use, what it feels like in the body. And as you're saying, that the mind goes offline, right? The thinking part of us, I use mind and body to differentiate between these two, but we can also use prefrontal cortex and amygdala and brainstem. But I just use, again and again, you'll hear me say mind, meaning thinking part, and body, meaning feeling part. And when we are too activated, that thinking capacity, it just turns off. And so to try and rely on that without having developed the skills, but also more importantly, the familiarity within what I call the body brain, within those parts of our brain that do regulate those fight, flight, freeze, appease options, right? If we don't have that familiarity, if we are relying on our body to access these tools without having practiced them when things are okay-ish or okay enough, our body won't be able to find it when things are very much not okay enough. And so it's this tricky situation where when we're okay enough, we can think our way through things and we can gain perspective and soothe ourselves with internal dialogue or soothe ourselves with perspective taking. The important thing to recognize is, although that works when we're okay enough, it really doesn't work when we're not
Yeah.
okay enough. And so what these tools are about is learning them from your thinking brain, practicing them when you're moderately distressed or even mostly okay, and then making those imprints familiar enough, deep enough within the body brain, within the nervous system, that your brain can easily access them when things are really going south. Because as we both know, the brain loves the familiar and it will choose it more than choosing what's helpful. It
Yeah.
will go to the pathway that it is most accustomed to. So if my body is used to and has deepened an imprint of, when my thinking self goes offline, I just resort to or even surrender to fight, flight, freeze, appease. And that's just what I do. And I kind of wait it out, maybe in a freeze state, or kind of just incredibly intensely react to it from a fight state until it's passed enough that I can think again. I'm going to keep doing that over and over again in experiences of extreme stress. So I need to make self-regulation familiar enough to my body and brain so that it can find it on its own when my prefrontal has gone offline. And in the book, I talk a lot about the medial prefrontal cortex, but I don't talk about it in those terms because this book is for the general public. But it's this bridge between that thinking self and that feeling self. And what research shows, which I find so fascinating, is that if we're dysregulated and we're trying to use our thinking self to calm our feeling self, we're increasing our dysregulation. It's like we're aggravating that bridge that links up the front brain and that deep interior survival brain. And that's rumination. And that is mental anxiety. And that is that worrying mind, that hamster wheel, all of those things that we're all familiar with that we can't stop. And it's sending messages to the body. Something really must be wrong. There's a lot of agitation here. And there are a lot of stories that seem very compelling and very convincing. And our body then becomes activated and then goes back up to the thinking self to say, yeah, you know what? I feel it too. And there's kind of this collaboration between body and brain, body, mind to dysregulate. But the reverse is also true. And this was the research that got me on the path initially, was if we use that bridge between the front brain and the survival brain to soothe the system, to feel, this is the important part, to feel the parts of the body that are relatively okay or even mostly okay, it does the opposite of that feedback loop I just talked about. Instead, it says, wait, there's a lot of me that's all right now. There's a lot of me that can feel capacity or ease or relative safety. And that then sends messages up to the thinking self to say, you know what? This worrying, this narrative that's going on, that might not be accurate or it might not pertain to right now. And then I can orient to what is happening right now, soothe the body further by seeing what's safe around me, hearing what's safe enough around me. And the body then creates this, what I call a positive feedback loop or a regulating feedback loop to reassure my system. If we can imprint that by using these tools that I describe in this book, we can change our access to self-regulation. And all of that happens in the bridge between our amygdala and our prefrontal cortex.
Wow, that is just so amazing and so powerful to have that understanding of what is happening in our brain and what that looks like, how we're experiencing it, and why we end up having such a sense of panic or overwhelm or just loss of control, that very
Mm-hmm.
painful place that you've experienced, I've experienced, I know my clients
Mm-hmm.
have, and to be able to understand what the brain is doing so that you know how to you can use that information to have a different experience.
Yes, exactly. Like you said recently in a podcast I was just listening to of yours, the brain is trying to help you. This survival strategy, these survival instincts are there to do good. They're just showing up when we don't need them, and then they're wreaking havoc. So,
Yeah.
fight, flight, freeze, appease, those definitely helped us through different circumstances in our history as a species, but they've also helped each of us in our lifetime. And when we're a person who was in dangerous situations as a child, even in unfamiliar circumstances too often, maybe unsupported by caregivers, again, too frequently, or, much more extreme experiences of developmental trauma where there was abuse or severe neglect. The range of what can imprint on the system is wide. When we have those imprints, our body remembers these approaches, these coping strategies of fight, flight, freeze, appease, they worked back then. And so if I saved myself or protected myself with this then, I should use it now. It's a really innocent part of us that's just
Yeah.
saying, hey, things don't seem okay. Let's get you through this. And the only problem with that is when that becomes your body's go-to. And over again, things don't feel okay or seem okay. And we keep going to survival, kind of like do or die, get it done, survival, no matter what, when we're just trying to get the mail, or just trying to
Right.
finish our errands. It's like,
Yeah.
it's so painful.
Yeah.
And so this is about helping the body find a different strategy to respond to that experience of anxiety, stress, overwhelm.
That made me think of as a way that I describe this in my practice is this shift or this difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe.
Exactly.
But our body and our brain, based on our early experiences, has just gotten really good at responding at perceived threats or perceived dangers. And we're not able to differentiate that this uncomfortable conversation I'm having with my child's teacher is not dangerous. It's uncomfortable. And it's finding that the levels beneath 8, 9, 10,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what I've seen so much in my practice and research was specifically many women finding themselves in midlife and suddenly experiencing this onset of extreme stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and wondering, why is this happening? And many people have said something to the effect of, what's wrong with me, to me?
Yes.
And it's so painful to be lost in that, which I was lost in it, and why I began this research and then had to write about it. What I think are some contributing factors are that when we're in our young life and we're experiencing overwhelming stress and anxiety, we're just getting through it. That's what we have to do. And in our young adulthood, and perhaps even to kind of early adulthood, I think it's often the case that the getting through it persists. We're setting
Yeah.
up career, home,
Mm-hmm.
relationship, family life. And when many women I've worked with have found themselves kind of set up enough, I've got career, I've got home, I've got family life, I've got relationship, suddenly the nervous system seems to perceive that things are safe enough to now begin to unpack or to kind of let rise to the surface these imprints that we've put aside successfully for often decades. And so the pains of, as you were just referencing, as an adult, we might talk to our child's teacher and feel distress. in that experience, the pain of being a child who was in that teacher meeting, or being a child whose teacher was speaking to them unkindly or in a way that even just felt surprising or startling. These imprints are starting to awaken in midlife, I think, because we have enough. And in many cases, women I've talked to feel like just enough or barely enough capacity to allow them to begin to rise to the surface. But it is enough that the survival brain, kind of the evolutionary brain, seems to perceive, okay, it's time to unpack these now. And that unpacking process can lead to what maybe we would call a midlife crisis, or that kind of midlife breakdown period. And I think I want to give voice to it because so many people end up feeling ashamed and wondering if they've failed or if something is wrong with them. And I just want to say, I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is an indication, actually, of progress and the invitation to become free of these burdens that your body, mind, system has been carrying for years and years.
Yeah, it's almost as if our ways of navigating and our ways of coping, they just don't work as well anymore. And in some ways, they've become like soul cages,
Yeah,
they're actually
beautiful.
kind of backfiring. And, one of my mentors, actually, when I was working on my dissertation, he described this process of midlife of having the proverbial rug like yanked out from underneath you. And that it was a time when what used to support you doesn't seem to work as well or work anymore. And it's this, now you have to find another way. And if our listeners are finding this interesting and this resonates, Rebekkah and I were just talking about doing another episode solely on this topic of motherhood and midlife and what that experience is like, and some ideas for understanding and navigating it.
Absolutely. Yes, because just this kind of little morsel of information about the motherhood piece, I've been really interested in these theories and research around the concept that we as mothers are reliving our own developmental stages, our own somatic memories as we nurture our children going through their developmental stages. So when my child's 5, I'm reliving aspects of my 5-year-old self, and all the way up to now I've got an almost 15-year-old and almost 13-year-old. And I've watched this process unfold in myself. It's been fascinating and at times excruciating, and at times, of course, delightfully uplifting and heartwarming. But I think it's not spoken about nearly enough that the process of mothering and nurturing is also an unpacking of your own experience of being mothered and nurtured.
Absolutely. So, Rebekkah, I wanted to go back to this idea of somatic approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what do you mean by a somatic approach, and why is a somatic approach significant?
So, soma meaning body, and then expanding that to our senses. So what we experience through the body, we feel, we smell and see and hear and touch. And it's looking at this entire experience and how our body can create ease, and then our ability to think clearly and perceive accurately, or the inverse, how our body participates in the process of dysregulating us and creating the inability to focus and think clearly. So it relates very much to what we're talking about, is understanding for ourselves when our experiences of stress and anxiety are going to be served by our thinking self, or when it will be served by our body, our feeling self, our sensing self. And the research is really strong and well outlined in the book, but summarized simply. It's not a heavy scientific read. I really wrote this so that the general public would have access to this information, because I, as a suffering citizen, couldn't find books that were just addressing just average people who suffer, average people who are experiencing unexplained overwhelm. So It's all scientifically based, but it's not a scientific read. But the soma is where our 90% of our nerve fibers travel from our gut brain up to our head brain. And we're sending what I call in the book telegrams from body to brain all day, every day. And we could be sending messages that promote well-being, safety, connection, or we could be sending the opposite. And if our body is dysregulated, because these imprints from long ago are coming back, as we were just talking about, it's going to send these messages that things aren't okay even when they are. And when we're in that state, we're accessing, as you talk about so often, we're accessing the amygdala, the part of the brain that has no timekeeper. We're accessing the part of the brain that doesn't differentiate between then and now. So as soon as I feel a physical state that is even sort of similar to my physical state that I experienced, or that, let's say, Jane experienced when she was being neglected by a parent, or that Shelley experienced when she was being overpowered by an ex-boyfriend, or that Samantha experienced when she was maybe living through her parents' divorce. It can be a wide variety of things. When that body state comes up, it's going to send these messages up to my brain. Things are wrong in a similar way to how they were wrong before. And then as soon as my brain gets the things are wrong message, there's no before. It's just things are wrong and it's all right now. So what happened with neglect or the boyfriend or the divorce, that's right now. And then I'm going to misinterpret what's happening around me. Stephen Porges calls this neuroception, where my body senses and assesses what's happening around me. And it can do this correctly when I'm regulated, and it can do this very incorrectly when I'm dysregulated. And then I'm going to have this negative bias we know about so well now that searches only for evidence that confirms my hypothesis. My hypothesis is things are not okay. And then I can only see and hear things that confirm that. If I try to talk myself out of it, I'm just going to be stuck in that tug of war, that battle. I need to feel my way through it. I need to feel the ability to find things that are okay in me and things that are okay around me, and know that through my senses. And then I can come back from that. So we're using the body because in experiences of extreme stress and anxiety, thinking isn't going to work. As you were saying, the thinking mind goes offline. That's why the body, we need it. We need it to help us. Can't think our way through it.
So, Rebekkah, is there a technique or an approach that you could briefly share with our listeners, just to give them an example of what this might be like to use the body?
Yeah. So I'll give two. And I'll give a body and I'll give a mind, both of which are in the book, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Okay. A couple of simple body tools that can be used, I was referring to is sensing in our internal experience what's okay enough. Whenever a person experiences anxiety, the brain is predisposed to focusing in on that because we need to attend to it and figure out, am I in danger? Am I being stabbed? Am I about to experience a predator? We need to figure out what's happening. So with that hyper focus, we lose what is often when we're having this reaction, not because of something that is actually not okay, but simply because of this habit of dysregulation, or because an imprint has been awakened in us, an imprint from long ago feels like it's right now. We lose access to the parts of us that are okay. And that is that bridge between body and mind. That's that prefrontal, medial prefrontal, where we can feel what's even sort of okay inside of me. And this is called sensing. In the book, I have a chapter on seeing and sensing. So we would start with, where am I mostly okay? Or if that's not available, where am I somewhat okay? Or if that's not available, where am I slightly less un-okay than another part of me, right? We'll start with as little a sense of okayness as is available. It still helps to soothe the body brain and to link up the amygdala and prefrontal with that bridge. So sensing body is the way that we wake up the medial prefrontal cortex, is the way that we use it for good, as I say in the book, because it can go to the channel of rumination, and it's usually self-referential critical rumination is what the literature shows, or it can go to the channel of self-sensing. And if we can turn that self-sensing channel to the okayness, the knowledge of what's all right enough, we can use that bridge to our benefit. So that's one example. Then the second part of that is seeing. So when I'm starting to feel anxious, when, Susan is standing at a concert and she is recognizing that there's some feeling of anxiety beginning, her heart's starting to beat faster, her mouth is starting to go dry, she's sweating, she suddenly doesn't want to be where she is and doesn't feel safe with any of the people around her. She can use seeing to see what part of this environment does appear okay to me. What am I able to access around me that is safe enough or pleasing enough, or an indication of what isn't like what my imprint remembers. So if she was, once in a really loud environment where she was being maybe physically attacked or perhaps being criticized or ostracized, the concert screams, which are exuberance and happiness, could awaken this fear self that says, I might not be okay right here. So she can then see with her seeing tool, oh, my favorite band is up on stage. Oh, my best friend is right next to me. Oh, the ceiling in this place is beautiful. I love it. These kinds of seeing exercises are helping our brain to access the here and now so that we come out of that trauma brain and come out of the brain that's convinced that now is then. Come out of the brain that's afraid. Last time I was in a loud environment like this, I was threatened, and so probably I'm going to be threatened again right now. We use seeing and then sensing to dismantle that cycle and to really undo the impacts of that old imprint that are coming up to the surface.
Those tools are so powerful and so simple, and they make so much sense.
So simple. And the mind tool that I'll give has to do with the other part of the book, which is about helping the general public learn ways that they can discharge some of the intense energy that comes from stress and anxiety on their own between therapy sessions, on their own after they've done a good chunk of therapy work and are integrating it, on their own as a preparation to see a therapist. I have a whole chapter in the book about when you need to consult a therapist, because these are self-help tools, but you and I both know that when a body system is persistently dysregulated, we need helpers along the way. We can't do it all by ourselves. So these are kind of augmentations for the ways that you listeners are already getting help or plan to be getting help. So this tool that initially is mind-based, but then becomes a body-serving tool is imagery. And research really indicates that the trauma brain, the amygdala, survival brain centers, love the language of imagery. This is really well documented in flashbacks. Negative images pop into the mind involuntarily when the body system is reminded of unsafe circumstances or traumatizing circumstances. We also see that when we're worried or anxious and negative what if scenarios are flashing in our head. So what we're doing with the mind-body stress reset is turning the brain's capacity to generate images that affect our body upside down, and intentionally generating images that affect our body positively. Instead of a flashback that scares us, let's create an image that soothes us. So I would talk about with clients, and I also talk about in the book, if you are a person for whom being late is an extreme trigger and stressor, and you're on your way somewhere and you're starting to recognize images of a hostile reception by who you're meeting is, coming your way, or maybe you're late for work again and you fear this is probably the last time I'm probably going to be severely reprimanded, maybe even fired, this last time that I do this. We can create images of support that help our system de-escalate our reactivity to the trigger of lateness as opposed to escalate. So maybe I'm going to imagine my closest colleagues covering for me and helping me figure out how I can quickly get in and get started on my shift without alerting whoever higher up is particularly reprimanding and unkind that my system is worried about. And as I envision that support, I can take note of, how does this feel? What's this like? Letting the mental image, so starting in the mind, then communicate with my body to soothe it. Being late is a simple, untriggering example for most people, but we all have been in situations that are much worse than that. And our mind can elicit images that are very disturbing to our body and brain. When we use images of support, or use images of an outcome that would have been more ideal, or use images that help us to feel agency, the self-efficacy or power that we fear not having access to, we can deeply change within a few moments how our body is responding to the situation at hand. So a funny, simple one I encountered myself that I write about in the book. Again, this is not a traumatic telling. I like to keep the examples simple so that we don't, any of us, have to become too triggered by my examples. But I was in the grocery store and I saw someone across the store that was a person I definitely didn't want to have a conversation with. We all know that experience. And I felt my heart rate quicken, and I was really in the midst of my most dysregulated period when this happened. So not only did my heart rate quicken, but I started to sweat profusely. My legs started to tremble. My mouth went dry. I was at the checkout, but I really wanted to flee, just wanted to run out of there and forget my groceries altogether. And I watched all this happen. And then I saw my own eyes take themselves out of what was a beautiful, large window near the checkout line and see it was fall. And I could see these beautiful autumn leaves on the trees. And then I started to hear the music that was playing up ahead, just really simple. And it was a song I liked enough, and feel, it's okay in here. It's more okay in here than I thought it was or felt it was. So I was using the seeing and sensing tool. My body did that on its own because I had practiced it so much. And then I became aware that I had been flashing in my mind this person coming across the store and creating an altercation with me. And I created the opposite. They don't even see me. And I just kind of created the image of them walking by, and I repeated the image of them walking by. And I then oriented, they're not here right now. They're in another part of the store. We're not having a conversation. And all of this happened within the span of 40 seconds. And my body went from what is flight reactivity, right? I wanted to run out of the store, and fear of fight reactivity. I was like, this is going to go badly. This person's going to come over here and create a really big situation with me. And instead, I went into this sense of, I'm okay. I'm okay enough because of these reset tools. So again, simple example, but now, we can all replace, what about when it's much harder than that? What about when the situation is worse? We can apply these tools to help ourselves get through it.
Another chapter in your book that I found, very interesting and important, and it's, you actually titled this section, The Stuff That's Hard to Talk About.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we've been talking about approaches that can be supportive and effective, can you share a little bit about what you've discovered about maybe some approaches that may not be as effective or helpful?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you bring this up, because I mention these things not to defame or discount the validity and efficacy of any approach for the people for whom it's working, but to actually defend, hopefully protect, and advocate for the people for whom it's not working. And I think these aren't talked about enough. These are the things that are hard to talk about, and it's unpopular to talk about in many circles. So let me first say, if the tools I'm about to talk about work for you, that's wonderful. Keep using them. They might keep working, and that's great. And there might be a period in your life in which they no longer work. And I hope you can hear this section with that in mind. And for some of you listeners, they never did work. And maybe this can give you a sense of why. So when we go into, let's start with talk therapy, and we're talking through in great detail our most difficult experiences and memories, our body is reliving that as we're describing it. And the traditional approach is a kind of exposure to these events in our lives to try and differentiate from the feeling we have about them and the truth of them now, or to try and de-escalate or lessen the reaction that we have to them. And so it's like going out into the sun and exposing yourself to a sunburn, which I think I did all the time when I was younger, because then you get that initial burn out of the way and then you just layer on tan after tan. But you've burned yourself. And if we're burning our skin repeatedly in service of toughening it up, I think we're injuring ourselves along the way. And I think we're at risk of creating not just the exposure of that first injury, but the experience of re-injuring and re-injuring and re-injuring. This can compound and exacerbate our stress and anxiety so intensely. So if you are a person for whom describing your experiences feels dysregulating, the body responds, you start to feel shut down, can't think clearly, are dissociated, you start to feel cold or numb, those are important messages that your body is flooded and it's trying to move into a freeze or shutdown state to protect you, because you've reached a level of overwhelm that it can't tolerate. So it has to, in a sense, disconnect from what's happening in order to get through the process of describing it. If you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, starting to feel your heart pounding, your eyes widening, and fear pulsing through you, that's your body again indicating to you that it is in fight or flight, and it's not able to be with the memories one after another, or to the depth, to the degree to which you're describing them. There's not capacity. So in somatic work, we talk about titration, which is little by little, just the amount that the body-mind system can tolerate at that time, just the dip in that we have capacity for. That's all we can work with at any one time.
I remember reading in your book, you described this as the less is more. And I felt like that was really helpful in understanding this. And I also want to echo what you said about, it's not that these approaches are bad and that they don't work. Just to repeat what you have written in your book, that certain approaches don't work for everyone at every time. And a skilled helper will be able to recognize when appropriate tools and approaches should be used, and where you are in your healing or recovery process. Many times in my work with clients who have experienced trauma, we don't talk about the trauma for a long time. First it's about learning how to soothe your nervous system, learning how to respond to the day-to-day experiences, when we're trying to just live our lives. And then, for example, like what you said, the grocery store, but it may not be as easy or as simple as a grocery store example like you described, but they happen all day long. And just learning, how do I do life as a mom, as a spouse or a partner at my work? How can I be creative and, manage all of that? And I think that that's really what we want. We want to feel effective at life. We want to feel capable. We want to feel safe. And that's where we start. And then we may or may not get to the depths of the really difficult traumatic experiences. And, there's a time and a place, and, your safety as you navigate that is of utmost importance, because if you feel safe, then your body is going to respond in kind. Your brain will recognize that. If you're not feeling safe, our brain and body will do what it does when it perceives danger.
That's exactly it, Lourdes. It's so important to recognize that if I am scaring myself as I'm trying to heal what scared me before, I'm not going to heal anything. I'm just going to be scared again. So in the book, I talk about that. If we were overwhelmed by it the first time, let's not overwhelm ourselves again by going into it too quickly, too deeply. I use the metaphor of a pool, that we're not jumping into the deep end and just experimenting to see if a person can swim. We are very gently dipping in a toe and then coming back out, and then maybe walking to the first step and hanging out for a little while up to our ankles and coming back out. And we're doing this over and over again, going in a little more and a little more until we feel that safety you're talking about, that self-efficacy, that we're confident, our body and trauma brain is confident that we can swim in a little further and we're going to be okay. It's not going to be like it was before. It's not going to overwhelm us like it did the first time.
Can you speak a little bit about mindfulness and what you have discovered as far as its helpfulness when we are experiencing stress?
Absolutely. So I was a practitioner for 15, almost 20 years, and I had been teaching for 10 plus years and seeing little indications that for some of the people I worked with, some of the retreat groups I taught, this meditation was creating more dis-ease instead of greater ease. But it wasn't until I had my own experience with it that I really understood viscerally what it was like. And again, it has to do with the scale of 1 to 10. If I'm sitting in meditation and I feel kind of an anxiety or an agitation that's a level 3, I'm probably going to be just fine noting it, which is a common meditation instruction, or witnessing it. I might even be able to distance from it, watch it like a cloud in the sky, and let it pass. If I'm experiencing an anxiety or agitation or a flashback that takes me to a level 7 or 8, witnessing it, if you can imagine sitting still, which feels incapacitating and dangerous for our survival brain, having my eyes closed where I can't orient and see what's around me, again, a trigger for the stress brain, and then witnessing, repeating images of flashbacks of overwhelming or stressful or fear-inducing events, my system is going to become further and further dysregulated, further and further afraid, and quite frankly, traumatized. And I've seen that happen again and again. I've seen it happen where I was a participant in a large room with very well-known meditation teachers, world famous. It's not about the skill level of the teacher. It's about the practice. And I've seen it happen in my own classes, which of course are not like that, but where I saw this isn't helping you. And it has to do with the level of traumatic imprint or the number of stress imprints a person is carrying with them. If you know that you're a person who's experienced a great deal of stress and trauma, I would encourage you to take meditation really cautiously. I would encourage you to be really aware. And there's a researcher at Brown University who speaks to this. I wrote about her in the book, and she says simply, use your own experience as your guide. If you're experiencing stress and anxiety, that's an indication from your body-mind system to stop what you're doing. If you're experiencing dissociation, where you're kind of closing your eyes to meditate and then you don't notice anything has happened until the bell rings, that's disconnection. That's your body saying, I had to leave in order to do that. If you start to feel like, one colleague of mine said that she was meditating for many years, feeling like ants were crawling all over her. That's your body telling you it doesn't feel safe here. This is something that we want to get away from. So I could list more descriptions, but use your own experience as a guide, whether it's meditation or talk therapy or any of the healing modalities that you're experimenting with. If it's not increasing your felt sense of safety, I don't think it's the right thing for right now. That would be my recommendation, is if you're not increasing ease and well-being, let's try something else. And like you were saying, a skilled practitioner, a skilled helper will know that. They'll know that if their client is in distress, let's take you out of this. This isn't the right tool for today.
Yes, and I think too, a skilled practitioner will not only be able to recognize where you are in terms of your window of tolerance that you're in, which we hear often with describing where we are in our level of distress, but will also have tools and know which tools will support you in getting to a place of ease and calm.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
And I write about the window of tolerance in the book in simpler terms. And it's a large part of the work of the mind-body stress reset is coming to understand how important those sensations that run through your body are, coming to value them. I think we're a culture that overvalues our thinking self and undervalues our feeling self. And coming to know what is, I write about in the book, your stress signature. What is it that happens for you when you're feeling afraid or overwhelmed or abandoned? What does that feel like and sound like in you, so that you can begin to recognize those symptoms as messengers? This is something your body is communicating to you. You need some support. You need some resources. You need to employ some of your practices. Being able to listen to your body in that way is extremely empowering, and in and of itself can reduce anxiety, to understand I've got some tools I can use when this happens.
Yeah. And I love to tell clients that everything that you're noticing in your body and in your mind, these are protectors, they're helpers, and
Yes.
they're trying to tell you and support you in feeling calm. You know, that's what they're trying to help. They're trying to keep you safe.
They're trying to keep you safe and let you know, please do some things that could help me right now because I'm tipping over the edge.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so lovely about the way you describe it, as they're protectors and helpers. In the book, I talk about it as a quiet child in the back of the room that nobody's been noticing, raising their hand saying, could I have some help now? I've been waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that feeling of there are parts of us that have been waiting for us to learn these embodied self-regulation tools so that we can feel safe in ourselves and navigate through the world with less fear. They're not the bearers of bad news. They're messengers. It's like when any of our children come to us and say, Mom, I fell down. We don't get upset with them. We kiss their knee and give them a big hug and ask them how it happened and check to see they're okay. Those are the same things we need to do for ourselves. And that's what the mind-body stress reset is about, is learning how to nurture our own systems through stress.
So, Rebekkah, if listeners are finding this very insightful and they're wanting to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to find you and also get a hold of your book?
Yes, I hope that you will all take a read of this book or a listen. The audiobook just came out. And you can find the book wherever books are sold, online or in-person stores. And you can find me at RebekkahLaDyne.com. So please feel free to look me up, and please give yourself some time to investigate these tools. to take care of your system. It's not something that we're taught in school, so to speak, is how to nurture our nervous system, although I wish it was.
Yes.
So let's give ourselves our adult courses and gain access to these, like we were saying, simple and yet very effective tools for well-being.
And we will put all of your information in the show notes, Rebekkah, so that our listeners can easily find you. And I just want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. I know that this information, our conversation, will be very helpful to our listeners. So thank you so much for being here today.
It is such a pleasure. It's really, I am a big fan of your work and your podcast, and I'm so glad I got to come and join the conversation with you. And I want to say to listeners, I wrote this book from me in my darkest hours to you in yours. It's about helping each of us get through those hard places that I think are an inevitable part of life. So I really wish you luck in your healing journey, and I hope that my book can be of help along the way.
Thank you so much, and take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting Women in Depth with a one-time or recurring donation. Any amount is appreciated and helps us continue to provide free, quality content for the world. If donating resonates with you, you can find the donation link on today's show notes. You can also follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.